All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining me for today's Trailhead Talk with United States Senate candidates for Arizona, Mark Kelly, and later on, Martha McSally. My name is Matthew Nelson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Arizona Trail Association. Since 1994, our organization's mission has been to protect, maintain, promote, enhance, and sustain the Arizona National Scenic Trail as a unique encounter with the land. The Arizona Trail is an 800-mile path from Mexico to Utah that connects deserts, mountains, canyons, forests, history, communities, and people. It's considered the largest volunteer service project in our state's history and contributes to Arizona's $21 billion outdoor recreation economy annually. According to the 2020 Economic Value of Trails in Arizona study recently conducted by the University of Arizona in collaboration with Arizona State Parks and Trails, an estimated 59.2% of Arizonans, adult population, that's about 3 million people, engaged in non-motorized recreation on trails within the past year. Collectively, that means more than 83,110,000 trail visits by Arizonans in a single year. Even before its designation as a National Scenic Trail by Congress in the year 2009, the Arizona Trail has enjoyed wide bipartisan support. And personally, I've enjoyed meeting with both Democratic and Republican members of Arizona's congressional delegation about over the past decade who have a genuine appreciation for the Arizona Trail and all the experiences it provides those who use it: hiking, mountain biking, running, backpacking, horseback riding, volunteering, and so much more. We believe that trails, outdoor recreation, and conservation are incredibly important to Arizonans. Chances are, if you're joining us for this Trailhead Talk, you have a personal connection to the Arizona National Scenic Trail or the parks, forests, and other natural resources that make Arizona such an amazing place to live. And just like you, the two individuals seeking to represent Arizona in the US Senate also have a connection to our public lands. Today, we'll be talking first with Democratic nominee Mark Kelly, an astronaut, engineer, and retired US Navy captain. The conversation will continue at 3:30 p.m. with Senator Martha McSally. Captain Kelly, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Well, Matt, thank you for having me with you and members of the Arizona Trail Association and all the folks out there that are really interested in this very important topic. It's so important for our state, for the future of our state. It's important for our country. And I want to thank everybody for joining today.
Great. I'd like to begin by asking you to share with us a little bit about your personal connection to the Arizona Trail and Arizona's public lands.
You know, it's kind of unique. Even before I met my wife, Gabby Giffords, and would spend a lot of time in Arizona, I remember my first space flight and flying over the United States and looking down for the first time. And I was flying with I was the pilot of the space shuttle. I remember looking down and saying to the space shuttle commander, a guy named Dom Gorey, who was also a Navy pilot like me, I remember saying, wow, that looks kind of interesting. What part of the Rocky Mountains is that? And Dom said, because he'd flown, this was my first space flight, this was his third, he said, well, that's not a mountain. That's a big hole in the ground. And he goes, that's the Grand Canyon. So it's an interesting perspective you get when you're in orbit, that sometimes canyons look like mountains and they could look, vice versa. So I've always felt this strong connection to that place from my first space flight. And it's a place that I later visited on multiple occasions with my wife, Gabby Giffords. We've hiked to the bottom, stayed at Phantom Ranch, hiked back up. Even after Gabby was injured, one of the things she really wanted to do is figure out a way to the back or back down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So because it was so special to her and so special to me as well. I've taken my kids multiple times to the Grand Canyon. And then Gabby has also played a really big role in the Arizona Trail becoming a national scenic trail. She was a champion of this effort in 2009, along with Congressman Raul Grijalva and Senator John McCain. Gabby always tried to do everything she could in a bipartisan way. But this is, really it's an Arizona issue. It's so important for our state. I'm looking forward to going back to the Grand Canyon, but also spending more time on maybe not all, but a lot of the 800 miles of the Arizona trail because it's just such an incredible place. I've been on other segments of it before. And I want to say we're really lucky here. A majority of our state is public lands. That's not true everywhere. It's not true in every state. We're the only state in the West where you can go from north to south on a trail and traverse the entire state. So I feel we're all really lucky to live here and have the opportunity to enjoy the public lands. And we've got to do as much as we can to preserve them.
That's great. Thank you. Kind of leads to our next question is talk a little bit about the importance of protecting public lands, both in Arizona and in America.
Well, like I said, our public lands are part of what makes Arizona such a special place and a great state. It's the best place to live in the country. But public lands are also part of our culture and our tradition here. And protecting public lands, means we have to protect our water and our air and our outdoor recreation, not only for all of us that currently use it, but for future generations as well. I mean, for our kids and our grandkids and their children. And my goal would be that our public lands here in Arizona 100 or 200 years from now are even better than they are today, and that we don't go in any way in the wrong direction. We need to really protect the Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon, it's a treasure, not just for Arizona, not just for our country, but for our entire planet. I'm really concerned about the possibility of uranium mining being, the project being started around the Grand Canyon. I came out very early against that. I think it's a mistake for our state. And it's just not necessary, and it has all kinds of environmental implications to it. As our population here in our state, we're at about 7.5 million people right now. As our population increases, we've got to invest in smart and sustainable infrastructure that doesn't sacrifice a square mile of public land. What happened in Utah a few years ago at Grand Staircase and Bears Ears National Monument was a real tragedy, and we can't let anything like that happen here in Arizona or anywhere else in our country. You can't go in reverse on this stuff. I am hopeful that folks will look back from somewhere in the future, look back 100 years and say, hey, those folks did a really good job preserving our public lands, because what we have today is even better than we had in the year 2020.
Great. Thank you so much. So one of the things that's become increasingly important is improving access to Arizona's outdoor places for urban and underserved communities. So if elected to the Senate, what would you do to help improve access to these outdoor places that we all love so much, especially for urban and underserved communities?
That's a good question, Matt. I'd say that Arizona's outdoor spaces have a lot to teach us about our rich environmental culture here and the history of our state as well. And it's important that everyone has access to these areas, regardless of where you live, regardless of your background, and that we do everything we can to preserve and expand access to green space, not just physical access, but we have to expand language access and break down language barriers and make sure that park staff is as diverse as the folks that are visiting the parks, and as diverse as our state, so that everybody is able to have a very meaningful experience when they visit our public lands. I mean, these are incredible outdoor spaces. I mean, beautiful spaces across our state. And usually you don't have to go very far to reach them, but sometimes for some folks you do. So I'm supportive of programs that's going to make it easier for folks to access public lands, whether it's increasing the availability to transportation, waiving entrance fees, school trips to parks and outdoor places. It should not be a cost prohibitive thing for any Arizonan. We've got to make sure we expand access so everybody gets to enjoy these spaces.
Excellent. I mentioned before that annually there's about a $21 billion benefit just in consumer spending within Arizona's outdoor recreation economy. And the recent study that was done, which looked at how often Arizonans use trails, that study assigned about an $8 billion consumer surplus. So that's just what people were spending locally to travel to these places to enjoy trails. So what will you do to support Arizona's outdoor recreation economy?
Well, Matt, you make a really good point. I mean, that is a significant amount of revenue that's just coming into our economy here. I think I mean, it's up there with like our university system and maybe, the defense industry. It is significant. And it's important that we bring everybody to the table and work with folks on both sides of the aisle to make sure that we're coming up with policies that are going to continue to allow us to attract those folks and help support this outdoor recreation economy that's so big here. I think one thing that's critical is that we come up with policies to help fight climate change, because that puts public land at risk. And it also puts our outdoor recreation economy at risk. Tourism and travel is such a huge part of our economy. So we have to also invest in maintenance and public safety, restoration programs, and educational programming within our public lands, so we can continue to enjoy and allow folks to treasure what we have here for generations, and allow folks from other parts of the country and other parts of the world to come. So I'm supportive of measures that would invest in our public lands so we can address things like deferred maintenance and continue the very vital restoration work that sometimes, gets underway and it gets started and then there's not enough funding and it could be delayed. So I'll be backing, measures that will be supportive of those things so we can continue to grow this outdoor recreation economy.
Thank you. So, as you know, Arizona has experienced significant wildfires over the past decade. These events have both a physical impact on the Arizona Trail and the landscape, but also these fires reallocate pretty scarce resources from trails and other recreational needs. So, what would you like to do to protect our forests, trails, parkways, waterways, and other natural areas from catastrophic wildfires?
Yeah, well, forests especially are, very complicated systems, and they're affected by a lot of different things. I think that's true of any complicated, system, in this case, an ecosystem. And these wildfires have been devastating to communities. Mount Lemmon here in Tucson was on fire for a good part of the summer. The side of the mountain, we didn't get the monsoon rains that we would normally expect, and that's true across our state, where in late July and August, the folks fighting these fires would get some assistance from Mother Nature. It didn't really happen this year. Because of that, we had 800,000 acres just this year alone in our state, that have burned. And then, it takes significant resources to fight these fires. Federal funding for public land maintenance and recreation has long been underfunded. And it's been put on the, not intended as a pun here, on the back burner for too long. And it's important that we do everything we can to prevent wildfires from, happening in the first place. And that means we've got to make sure our public land managers have the kind of the funding that they need to maintain the areas that they're responsible for. This also improves public safety. It's important to educate the public on how best to interact with outside lands to prevent wildfires. But often wildfires are started by weather events, lightning, and so firefighters have to have the resources to do the job. And then we've got to take steps to improve forest health. The Forest Restoration Initiative, FOR-FRI, is incredibly important. This is going to reduce the risk of wildfires and create a sustainable industry, with the wood products that are going to come from the forests, and it'll be industry right here in Arizona and some more good jobs. So I would love to see that model expanded throughout our state, and if it works well, even to other states. Like many of you, I was really happy to see Congress pass the Great American Outdoors Act and fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund. But I think we should be doing much more to protect and restore outdoor spaces. We've got to be proactive and properly equip our public land managers with the tools that they need to prevent and combat fires before they happen or when they happen, very, very soon. But there's some things we can do before, like eradicating invasive species that often damage a forest and make it more susceptible to forest fire. Educating the public and implementing best practices that are based on science to preserve our outdoor spaces. We talked a lot about this. I'm a graduate of the National Outdoor Leadership School, which is an organization here in the United States. They have branches all across the planet. I've spent time in, hiking and sea kayaking, and a lot of the training we get there has to do with conservation and how do you protect, these lands. And these would be like trips that I would do for NASA for like training, crew training, and spending weeks out in the out in the environment on public lands, and a lot of discussion about how do we improve this, for the next generation. But on the firefighter issue, we've got to make sure that firefighters are well equipped and they have the resources to get the job done quickly and safely. It's not only the environmentally responsible thing, but investing in our outdoor spaces now to prevent devastating wildfires. It is economically and fiscally responsible as well, especially in the long run. And it's going to make it easier for places like and entities like the Arizona Trail to keep the trail safe and open and accessible for everybody.
Great. Kind of along that same line, and you mentioned climate change before, after 4 of some of the hottest months ever recorded in recent history in Arizona, how important is addressing climate change, and what will you do to help Arizona remain resilient and a beautiful place to live?
Yeah, I think it's for us here in the desert and for the forests in the northern part of our state. It's an issue, and it's not just going to go away on its own. I mean, climate change is real and it's ever present here in our state. The health and safety of everybody in Arizona depends on our elected officials taking this very seriously. And I feel we're kind of on the front lines of climate change. We've got our own particular issues with it. This issue of climate change affects different places differently. The Gulf Coast is different than Florida, which is, the East Coast of Florida, say, which is different than what we have to deal with, or other countries have to deal with. We can lead on this. We can lead on clean energy, adopting clean energy, and we can lead on other infrastructure that protects the health and safety of our communities. In Arizona, we're kind of lucky here in some sense with regards to climate, because we have the capacity to generate a significant amount of energy from solar. So we need to focus on that, but we also have to focus on other sources of renewable energy, wind, hydro. I strongly support the development and deployment of technology that makes renewable energy more efficient, reliable, and affordable for everybody. In Arizona, I think it's the perfect state to lead the country in renewable energy deployment. So I look forward to working with folks on both sides of the aisle to introduce and support measures that would advance our renewable energy and our technology. And I want Arizona to be a welcoming environment for the clean energy industry, a place where people are going to want to move to because the air is clean, the water is clean, and it's good for their health, and it's a great place to live. Renewable energy infrastructure will create jobs and combat the devastating effects of climate change, making Arizona an even more desirable place to live and raise a family and retire. So we've got to work together to make this happen. And Arizona has so much potential to be more of a leader in this than it already currently is. And I'm going to try to help do that.
Excellent, thank you. Could you share with our viewers a little bit more about what your primary legislative goals might be, specifically that might be of interest to the outdoor community?
Yeah, same thing, right? Renewable energy. So Arizona can lead on this issue. We should be creating the technology here, inventing it here, innovating it here, building it here, producing it here. And it's not just good for the outdoor community. It means big opportunities for small businesses and good paying jobs for Arizonans. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll support legislation to protect and preserve our public lands. And that starts with protecting the Grand Canyon from uranium mining. There are abandoned uranium mines in our state. I think on the Navajo Nation alone, 500 of them or more. We need to be focused on cleaning those up and then protecting our public health. But this issue of expanding renewable energy, I'd be an advocate for extending the investment tax credit for renewable energy products or projects. Solar, was a 30% tax credit. It's now 26%. Should be extended for another 5 years and another 5 years after that. If we continue to do that, we will continue to add that solar capacity here. And then we've got to figure out, some things on energy storage. But the best news is that we can create the technology here and we can deploy it here. And that is that's a really great thing about our state.
Excellent. Well, we put a call out to the general public over the past week and invited them to ask you questions as well. We had quite a few responses. The overwhelming majority, which was 4 people who had almost the identical question. So I thought it'd be appropriate to answer that. And it aligns a little bit with Navajo Nation, which you just mentioned. So the question is, first it's a statement, then a question. The meaning of the word indigenous means from the land. And today we're talking primarily about public lands, which are a result of forcible removal of indigenous people from the landscape. But in your opinion, what are the greatest threats today in Arizona to Native people's land and their spiritual rights to the land? And what do you think you can do to help address some of these threats?
Well, I think it's important, to acknowledge that, public land is indigenous land, and that Native people, have a right, and we've got to make sure that we respect the treaty obligations that we have, that we respect that tribal nations are sovereign nations, and then we have a relationship as one government to the other. And I look forward to strengthening that relationship, but also, representing not only Navajo tribal members, but the tribal members of the other 22 indigenous tribes across our state. And one big concern is, infrastructure on tribal communities. And it makes it really challenging for, young people to, find jobs and careers and be able to remain at their home in their community. So we've got to come up with projects that'll grow jobs. Solar seems to be a, obvious one, but also support, farming in tribal communities that already exists, but often is, challenged. We've got a mega drought right now, and, the rainfall on the Navajo Nation is, significantly less than we normally see in a year. So programs to support and renew our water infrastructure is incredibly important, and make sure that tribal nations are able to finish whatever, in some cases they're working on water settlements with the federal government and the state government. And there's land acquisition, programs that are based on prior agreements that sometimes take decades. So I think it's up to the United States Senate, and especially as a senator from a state that has 22 tribal nations, to work on these issues to help benefit tribal communities. Infrastructure programs, broadband is a significant one, but also just energy in general, and water, and sanitation. So there needs to be a renewed focus on this, and I plan to do that if I'm elected to the United States Senate.
Thank you. I think we have time for about one more question, and this one comes to us from Kelly in Flagstaff, who says, over the past 3.5 years, we've seen unprecedented rollbacks on important environmental laws to protect air, water, soil, wildlife, and even national monument boundaries. If elected to the Senate, what will you do to protect these important resources?
Yeah, so I before I launched in a rocket ship and got to see our planet, I didn't have I wouldn't say I was necessarily an environmentalist, but I am now. I mean, when you get an opportunity to see the place we live as this big round ball just floating in the blackness of space, and you suddenly realize that, first of all, we are all in this together and we have no place else to go. And then you look down at how thin the atmosphere is. It's like a contact lens on an eyeball. And it's a little bit, I would say it's a little bit disturbing the first time you see it. And you're kind of concerned about the environment. I would say there probably aren't many astronauts that go into space and see this and don't consider themselves an environmentalist afterwards. True for me, my brother, all of my colleagues. So you become really focused on trying to protect the environment. So I hope, if elected, my service in the United States Senate will be one for however long I'm there, as somebody that is going to try to improve our environment. You talk about, clean air and rollbacks, and we need a global strategy to address this. Hey, and we're the global leaders on so many issues. We have to be leading on this. We can't leave that up to another country. It's not going to be done right. I'm convinced. I mean, it has to be us. So I hope us to get us back in, and get us back on the correct trajectory. I know a little bit about trajectories, right? We got to get back on the right path here and on the right trajectory, and we've got to address this issue. We can't wait another decade or two.
Thank you. Well, with a few minutes we have left, is there anything else that you'd like to share with folks that are tuning in?
Well, I'm so looking forward to getting, back on at least some segment of the Arizona Trail, but especially up at the Grand Canyon. My wife, Gabby Giffords, talks about that all the time. And just like so many Arizonans, we've been all, and, folks across our country have been cooped up in our houses. Fortunately, that's one of the things that is relatively safe to do, to kind of go on a hike and get outside on our public lands. So I encourage folks to do that, and but do it safely. Make sure you're socially distanced, and if you're around people, you're wearing a mask. And we're going to get through this. We've got a significant public health crisis and an economic crisis, but as a country, we're really good at solving hard problems. We're going to solve this one, and we're going to address the issue of climate change. And my hope for the future of our state is, like I said, 100 years from now, our public lands are better than they are today. So thank you, everybody.
Well, Captain Kelly, it's been an absolute pleasure being able to talk to you this afternoon, and I really appreciate you making time for our Trailhead Talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Matt. We'll see you.
So this event is made possible with the support from our members, donors, and business partners. If you're a supporter of the Arizona Trail Association, thank you. If you're not, you can learn more about how to get involved with our organization at aztrail.org. Thank you for joining the Arizona Trail Association's Trailhead Talk, and we'll see you at 3:30 p.m. for a conversation with Senator Martha McSally.